So in the last video, we said that bone has this amazing property of healing. And in this video, I want to go in detail on how that happens. So to walk you through what's going on in this figure here, what we have is a microscopic crack in the bone. And this might occur if maybe you're sedentary and you start to exercise, or you increase your training volume, or if you are, just do a slightly longer workout than usual. Turns out that these kinds of micro instances of damage happen all the time. They're happening anytime you go and work out. And your ability to sustain healthy bone has a lot to do with your ability to repair these areas of damage. So let's walk through what happens. So step 0 is damage. The precursor to all this is you sustain some bone damage. Right now, we'll talk about microscopic damage, but that could also be a bone break. The same processes happen. So once your body has sensed that bone damage has occurred, the first thing that happens is you activate something called osteoclasts. Osteo for bone, and then clast with a C. The way I remember this is the osteoclast, it cleaves or cuts away old bone. So you can see that right here. They're these specialized cells that are specially adapted to eat away at bone tissue. So they eat away at the mineralized old bone cells. And they do that to make way for new, better, healthy, undamaged bone. So after the osteoclasts have been active for a while, your body activates another type of cell called osteoblasts with a B. I like to think of that as like B for building, because these actually build new bone cells. So you can see those here. They actually just kind of hang out on the surface of your bone and just wait for something to do. And once they get activated, they come in and they start laying down new bone tissue. And they kind of grab themselves, attach themselves into the matrix of bone tissue. And then they're essentially like stuck in place. And then they do what's called, they mineralize, which is exactly what it sounds like. And once that's happened, they are turned into, or we call them, osteocytes. Cytes, and cyte is just means cell. So these are actual bone cells, and you can see them down here. This old bone labeled here, that's just an osteoblast that grabbed onto a bunch of other osteoblasts, solidified itself by mineralizing, meaning taking calcium and dramatically increasing its strength. And that's essentially how the new bone is formed. So as the osteoblasts eat away in this direction, the osteoclasts eat away in this direction, the osteoblasts come in, fill in space, and they eventually just get locked in place. So what is interesting to notice here is that, or what's maybe worth thinking about, is the relationship between damage and remodeling. So one other thing about osteocytes, what these solidified osteoblasts, is that they emit cell signals that downregulate bone formation, whereas bone damage induces cells that upregulate bone formation. So obviously, you don't want to be just forming bone endlessly. So once you reach a nice equilibrium, that's when your bone mass will stabilize. So there's some important implications to this bone remodeling process, which is that bone is going to remodel in response to the stresses that you put on it. And this is, in fact, it's so important that there is a term for this. It's named after a physician named Wolf with 2 F's. you will quite often see references to Wolff's Law, which says that you lay down bone where it's needed and you take it away where it's not needed. So bone stress leads to bone formation. At that particular area. And then the opposite is also true. So what would we call it? Like lack of bone stress. That leads to, maybe we can call it bone resorption. That's what osteoclasts do. They resorb. Bone resorption. And there's many instances where you can see this. By the way, when I say stress, I mean literally what we talked about last week, force divided by cross-sectional area. It's the actual mechanical stress in the bone that induces these adaptations. So one area you can see this is on medical images. This is a X-ray of a healthy 11-year-old. And I want to narrow in on the calcaneus, the heel bone here. So let's just think about for a moment the mechanical stresses in the calcaneus. Let me draw the tibia here, and then you've got the talus, and then the calcaneus is down like this. And then we'll just say the rest of the foot goes off like that. Your body weight is perched up on top, way up here. And if you're just standing, that's, because of gravity, you've got this body weight pushing down. So that force needs to get transmitted into the ground, and it can get transmitted this way and this way. And if you're standing upright, it's probably maybe more or less evenly balanced here. So you could think about that force kind of like having almost like a conduit through the calcaneus, and that chronic exposure to force, which is going to create stress, which is going to create strain in the bone, is probably going to induce some remodeling. And what's quite remarkable is that on modern digital X-rays, you can see the stress lines in the bone here. So do you notice how these little lines on the bone are going like this? This is exactly in the direction of the foot, and then the lines here are going like this. This is precisely in the direction of the mechanical strains that the body is being exposed to. So you can see this in X-rays, and the reason you can see this is there are these kind of wavy lines, these wavy stress lines on the bone that are the result of that exposure to mechanical stress. That is Wolff's Law in action right there. Another interesting little example of this comes from risk of stress fracture in military recruits. So there's a lot of research on overuse injuries that comes from the military, because it turns out one great way to induce overuse injuries is to get a bunch of sedentary people and send them to boot camp. So this costs the military a lot of money, and so there's a lot of research into why these injuries happen and to whom they happen. So what I want to this is a table from a study that looked at of military recruits that engaged in various types of activity before they joined the military, what was their incidence of stress fracture. And I just want to direct your attention towards two numbers. One is the people who went swimming, people who are chronic habitual swimmers, versus people who were habitual ball sport players. And of course, that's basketball, soccer, volleyball, and so on. Notice that there is a significantly lower incidence. Only 12% of the people who played ball sports got stress fractures compared to 38% of the people who did swimming. One reason for this might be that participating in a sport like basketball is going to involve a lot of very high magnitude loading going into your body that will condition your bones to be able to handle the stresses of doing long marches in the military with lots of mass on your back in your rucksack. So this is just another interesting example of this Wolff's Law phenomenon. Now, there's one other thing that I want to talk about, which is the signals. Well, actually, there's two more things I want to talk about, but the first of which is signals for remodeling. Let's say signals for bone remodeling. So this is what are the things that make your body realize that its bones are not strong enough? Large magnitudes of bone strain. You can think about stress and strain being roughly, not the same thing here, but having the same consequence. Strain, I mean the percentage change in bone length. Large strain rates. That means like the rate of loading. Also, what's a good way to put this? Maybe not the same strain over and over again. And what I mean by that is it turns out that there is a stronger bone response if you do activities that involve slightly different forces going into your body. So like this and this and this and this and this is better than just like the same force applied over and over and over and over again. One other point to this that comes out of animal research is that to induce a max adaptation, meaning to get the strongest signal to tell your body, hey, we really need to upregulate bone remodeling, it only takes about maybe 60 to 100-ish loading cycles per day. And what I mean by a loading cycle is, say, like one jump in volleyball, or one rep of the squat, or one box jump, or one step taken while you're running. This has some important implications for interventions for bone strength, which we'll talk about in the next video. But it suggests it's not that more are worse. It's just that there's real diminishing returns after like 60 or 100 loading cycles. So having learned how this adaptation process works, in the next video we can talk about how to put some of these ideas into practice in terms of designing interventions for bone strength. And I'll see you in the next video.